Let's talk about graduating your assistant from task manager to project manager. My name is Tim Francis, founder of a handful of companies, including Great Assistant. Today in this video, I'm going to cover for you a few elements. Number one, defining what a task manager is and defining what a project manager is. Secondly, giving you a roadmap for what it would take for your assistant to go from being a task manager to being a project manager. An important tool called task stacking and how that will really speed things up for you. And finally, a surefire sign that you might be moving too fast, too slow, or just right in your progress with your assistant. So let's dig in. And as you can tell, I'm following along with some notes here. And let's begin by defining task manager versus project manager. In my opinion, a task manager is going to be someone who knows how to take a task. They may not understand what it is or what it means, but they can take that task, get it into a project management tool like Asana, Basecamp, Teamwork, Notion, however you're going to manage tasks. They can also assign a due date, assign an owner of a task, and then possibly even follow up with the owners of tasks if tasks are becoming due. That's how I define a task manager. A project manager, on the other hand, is significantly more advanced and complicated. So a project manager needs to know all the players involved, who are the people involved. They have knowledge of industry acronyms and workflows and lingo. They have knowledge of the company's, your company's acronyms, workflows, and lingo. They understand the actual journey that the end user is going to go through once the end user is using whatever project is being created. Now that could be an external end user, like what is the customer's journey as they use this new website that we're building. Or maybe it is the internal user. Maybe if our teammates have to submit their hours to get paid, what's their journey? Whoever the project manager is, they need to understand what the end user is going to be going through. The project manager likely also has contacts that they can reach both inside the organization and outside the organization for help. That could include vendors, including even possibly some helpers online, like on Upwork.com, or similarly ranked or positioned colleagues in other businesses. So maybe there's other project managers in sister companies or companies that are friendly to you. They might even have mentors to reach out for help internally, and so they might be looking to you for help, or maybe even externally. Maybe there's a coaching program or some kind of mentor they could get for additional help. A project manager is also going to understand the basic functionality of all the tools required to complete this project. That doesn't mean that they have expert level knowledge, just basic knowledge. So for example, a project manager of a website project would know like the basics of, not all of coding, but just kind of like some basics of HTML, basics of how WordPress works, basics of maybe even how a little bit of Adobe Photoshop works, so that the project manager can speak the language. Now, obviously, the more basic the project, the less there is to learn. And that is a part of the process of leading a project manager, is helping them to know what the scope is. So as you can see, a task manager could come in, they may not have a lot of knowledge, but if their wiring is right, they can be detail-oriented and organized, whereas a project manager has to understand a lot about tools, they have to understand a lot about workflows and the ecosystem in which they're organizing and operating. Okay, so that's the difference between, in my mind, task manager and project manager. Now, what about the roadmap for a task manager to become a project manager? So over time, it's definitely possible for a task manager to graduate into a project manager role if the task manager is motivated and if the project manager is equally as motivated. And it is a two-part process, kind of like 2 feet walking. You need a right foot and a left step, and a right step and a left step, right, left. Taking over the totality of a project involves a good deal of complexity. So for your assistant who's acting as your task manager, they're gonna have to get to know people, tools, process, and lingo. And in my opinion, there's 5 elements that are required for your assistant to take that journey from task manager to project manager. So number 1, the task manager needs to be given tasks which are well selected and well defined. So we use the 7 yes test in 360 delegation to make that happen. And those tasks are delegated effectively in a sensible sequence. The order that you hand off tasks makes sense. So again, if you're using 7 yes tests and 360 delegation, that should be very straightforward for you. Okay, the second item that you need. We also need a motivated coach who takes and makes the time to coach, offering sufficient supervision, feedback, and coaching to your assistant. Now, I will tell you that far more often when I see this breakdown, it's not because the task manager doesn't step up to the plate. It's actually because the coach, who's oftentimes the entrepreneur, the CEO, the leader, they're the ones that drop the ball because they're not making enough time to coach, give feedback, train, delegate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it is oftentimes up to the entrepreneur or the leader to be stepping up to the plate. Third element that we need is we obviously need a motivated assistant who's acting as task manager who wants to move into a higher responsibility position. If they don't actually want the responsibility, then no sense in putting them in that position. And that motivated task manager also has to have the right wiring. They have to have good attention to detail. They have to be organized. They want to be with the organization for the long term. No sense in training someone on all the tasks and lingo and workflows if they're just going to leave your business in 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, right? We want someone who wants to be there long term and their world is set up for them to be there long term. They don't have like 10 clients and 3 sub-assistants running some virtual assistant agency. No. We want an assistant who's focused, dedicated, has just you or maybe you and one other client, that's it. And they are really setting themselves up to be the assistant, not an agency with multiple assistants. That's the third element. The fourth element we need are the right expectations. If you think your assistant's gonna go from task manager to project manager in 7 days, it's not gonna happen. You need multiple cycles of whatever it is that you're doing before an assistant can take it over. So you gotta be realistic about the timeline and the amount of time and energy you'll need to put in. And I think if you have the right expectations and you set those expectations with your assistant, say, hey, it's not a problem. I know you're not gonna get this right the first time. It's gonna be a process. We're gonna grow together. Be very reassuring that way. And I think that you'll be nailing the expectations. The fifth and final element for your assistant to go from task manager to project manager is simply sufficient reps in time. So you need to be able to put them in that scenario week after week or month after month so that they can continually learn and get better and get feedback over and over and over again. And I think that part of that sufficient reps and that sufficient time is actually sufficient feedback, right? So after each attempt, let's say that your assistant is setting up a monthly webinar for you, give them feedback. And it doesn't have to be critical, it can be collaborative. You can simply say after each webinar ends, even if you just take 10 minutes and say what worked, what didn't work, what would you do better next time? And then identify those. It can be as quick as a 10-minute, 15-minute conversation. Your assistant can then go back, make some improvements. Maybe you'll have to get involved and offer a little more training, and you'll be better and better every single repetition. So sufficient reps, time, and feedback is the fifth element. So those are the 5 elements required for your task manager, your assistant, to become a project manager in your business. So let's talk about this next idea. It's incredibly helpful on this graduation path, and it's the idea of task stacking. So in my experience, for a task manager to graduate into a project manager, task stacking is an exceptional strategy. So in short, what is task stacking? It's when you take a project, you break it down into subparts, and then the task manager learns each independent component part. And then by delegating all these tasks that are really near to each other, pretty soon you can group them all together, task stack them, and now you can delegate the whole pile together. So I'll give you a true story. 10 years ago, I was hosting a lunch and learn every single month at the local Hilton Hotel in my home city. At the time, I lived in Edmonton, Canada. Lots goes into hosting even a simple lunch and learn event of 20, 30, 40 people. There's a lot involved. I'll give you a flavor of some of the tasks. So first of all, we would have to send an email broadcast to all of our past attendees to invite them to each successive lunch. We'd have to give them the date, the time, the location. Secondly, every single month we'd have to go into meetup.com, which is how we promoted our events and we attracted entrepreneurs to come attend. We'd go into the admin area of Meetup and send a DM to all of the participants in our group, again, inviting them out, giving them the date, time, and location. We would also have to contact the Hilton every single month to book it, and then call again a second time the week of the presentation to confirm that everything was a go. We would also have to book a volunteer to come and work the front desk and process registrations as attendees were coming through. We also had to book our videographer every single month to come and shoot our sessions. And then the day before the event, we would have to send a final number of registrants to the hotel management at the Hilton so they could prepare the proper amount of food. They always had a buffet ready that they would have more or less food based on how many people we had coming to lunch. Now this is just a selection. There's more that went into it, but that's a flavor of what would happen each and every month. So to begin, I personally had to define and design. Define and design. So I had to define the outer limits of the task and then design how it should be done. This is where I use 360 delegation. My assistant then worked at that time only as a task manager. She would capture the required tasks that were needed into our project management tool. We were using Asana, and then she would remind me when deadlines were coming. So I define what does a successful lunch and learn look like. I came up with the steps, hand that to my assistant. She input it into Asana, put the dates on it, and then she'd remind me to keep me on track. Great, that's awesome. We were at the task management stage. Soon thereafter though, I started bringing her more into the business and started handing over a few steps to her. We would do the next lunch, we would do a quick retrospective, what worked, what didn't work, what could be better, and she would make some improvements. I'd teach her a few more things, the next month would come, she would do even more tasks. So she kept taking over more and more and more of the component parts of our lunch and learn until she'd actually taken over every single step that she possibly could. Now I say possibly, because there were some things she just never was going to take over. I was still the proverbial surgeon in the room, where I was focused on strategy, high-level access, and she did everything else. She was the proverbial nurse, nurse assistant, physician assistant, operating room manager, janitor, scrub nurse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I did just the surgeon room, she did in the room part, and she did everything else. So, for example, what were the surgeon in the room parts that I did? I'm still the one who picked the date that we would do the lunch. I would pick the topic. I would write the promotional copy. I would then create the speech that I'd give. And then the day of the presentation, I would give the speech. So there's really only 5 things remaining that I did. She did the other like 30 or 40 steps, okay? And we got to that point where all I would have to do at that point is basically just show up, give the talk, shake some hands, meet people, and that was that. So now also watch that as she was learning how to do more and more of the component parts, she was learning, right? She was learning every single month more and more who the key people were, who the key vendors were, acronyms, workflows, and tools. So for example, she learned how to log into meetup.com. She learned how to send messages to people in meetup.com. She learned how to log into our CRM. She learned how to send email broadcasts inside of our CRM. She gained first name relationships with our different vendors, with our 3 registration volunteers. We had 3 of them, and sometimes it'd be person A, sometimes it'd be person B, sometimes it'd be person C. And because my assistant got to know all 3, she could just directly contact the first person. If they weren't available, no problem. She would just directly contact the next person. My assistant didn't have to keep coming back to me because she had developed the experience, the repetition, and the relationships with each of the registration volunteers. Same thing with our videographer. She got onto a first name basis with our 2 different videographers. We only needed 1 videographer per month. So if there ever came a month where videographer number 1 wasn't available, not a problem. My assistant did not have to ask me for help. She could just go to the next person. We had an approved list of vendors for each of the important roles, and my assistant could just go down the list and ask the next person if she ever needed to. Those first name relationships were powerful. And she also developed a great first name relationship with hotel management. She actually developed such a good relationship with them. And then obviously I had such a nice experience with them, and I was obviously professional and courteous when I was on site at the Hilton, that the management actually let us just store all of our banners and everything at the hotel. So every single month, I didn't even have to lug the banner back and forth or any of our materials. We could just leave it at the Hilton, which was really, 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 really nice. So we got to a point where we then task stacked all of these subtasks my assistant was learning into one process called, like a super process called production of monthly lunch and learn. And we got to the point that basically I could just say to my assistant, hey, let's basically run the algorithm, or let's run the formula. Let's go do the next lunch and learn. Here's the date that I'd like to do it. Here's the topic, here's the promotional copy. And she would go and take care of absolutely everything else. It was simply awesome. So let's talk in the final phase of our chat today about how you can tell if you're going too fast or too slow and what you can do about it. So I would say overall, your assistant graduating from task manager to project manager, at no point should it feel overwhelming. It shouldn't at any point feel like this is a massive leap, or your assistant, it feels overwhelmed because they're jumping in the deep end or something like that. It should always just feel like, hey, it's just not a big deal. It's just the next logical step, the next step, the next step, the next step, until one day you step back and you go, oh my goodness, my assistant is basically running this whole thing. And it kind of sneaks up on you that they've made this graduation. If at any point they are feeling overwhelmed, then if it's feeling like too big of a leap, then there's likely one of 4 reasons why and what you can do. So the first reason is they don't know enough of what to do, so all you got to do is simply offer more training. If that's not the issue, then you simply maybe need to offer more guidance, either live where you help them do the task, or you look over their shoulder while they do it, maybe they can watch you do it. Or maybe you just need to double check their work before release because they're nervous that they're going to disappoint you with the quality of their work. That would be the second reason and solution. The third reason and solution would be that perhaps you've delegated too big of a task and need to unpack it into smaller pieces. And then in that case, your assistant now has a fighting chance to actually get it right. The fourth problem is unrealistic expectations. So the solution is just to lower your expectations a bit for the short term, take some pressure off your assistant, and give it a little more time, a few more reps, and I think you'll be delighted how far it comes. So there you go. Those are the keys to the kingdom of how you can take an assistant who is a great task manager and over time graduate them into project manager. Hope that was helpful.